I'm going to be doing the penny experiment today, which is kind of cleaning up pennies with using vinegar and salt. So I'm going to go ahead and do this experiment. I'm going to put like about a quarter cup of vinegar, which is what the video showed to do, as well as using like a teaspoon of salt, but I'm just going to kind of guess. The salt is what speeds up the reaction. So I'm gonna mix it up until the salt dissolves in it. Okay, now that that's dissolved, I have a few pennies here. I tried to find some old ones, that way you can see a difference better. So I'm going to drop the pennies into the vinegar solution. And let's see if I can show you. So here is what my pennies in the vinegar looks like. And typically you would just kind of wait to see, and I can already kind of see it lifting up a little bit. The brown from the pennies is kind of coming clean with the vinegar. So the acetic acid in vinegar that dissolves the copper oxide, and by adding the salt, that also speeds up the process. Corroded pennies usually turn bright green, or not bright green, but they turn bright again, like to the coppery color. Typically in less than a minute. You can also do the same experiment I found with lemon juice, but today we're using the vinegar. When you put the pennies into the water after the reaction, which I will do that shortly. So if I take these pennies out and put them into the cup of water, that actually will stop the reaction from happening, and they'll just remain that color that was done with the reaction. But if they're left to sit on a towel, so I have a paper towel here, and if I take a few out and let them sit on this towel, I found that they will turn a bluish green color. The reason why this is happening is because the reason why pennies typically get dull and dirty is because the copper in the pennies react with the oxygen in the air to form that copper oxide, like I mentioned before. So when these pennies are sitting out with the vinegar, it kind of like finishes up the reaction, and it will eventually turn them blue. So also I want to add that regarding the bluish green pennies, I'm not sure if it will show right now, but when the vinegar and salt dissolve the copper oxide layer, which is the top layer, which is where the vinegar was touching and the salt, they make it easier for the copper atoms to join oxygen from the air and the chlorine from the salt to make a bluish green compound, which is called malachite. And that's what we saw in the video as it was explaining, and that's what these pennies will be doing too. However, putting them in the water, like I said, stopped the reaction, and they'll just remain that color, the copper color. So the reason why vinegar and salt clean the pennies, as I mentioned before, using the vinegar and the salt speeds up the reaction, but copper oxide dissolves very quickly in the weak acid, which vinegar is a weak acid, and table salt with vinegar together, it mixes that acidic solution together. And the pennies looked so dirty before I put them in the vinegar because of everything being made up around us, being called atoms. Some things are just made of one kind of atom, but like the copper penny, for example, it's made up of just copper atoms. but sometimes atoms of different kinds join together to make different kinds of molecules. Copper atoms can combine with oxygen atoms from the air and make the copper oxide, as I've been explaining before. And that's kind of why the pennies look dull and dirty, because they were covered with copper oxide, but the vinegar removed that. So just following up, the pennies on this sheet of paper will turn a bluish color. I know it said to wait a little. I can see it in the one penny. The other pennies were already kind of shiny. And then the pennies in here, as I mentioned before, the reaction stops, so they'll remain that color. So that is how we obtain pennies, and that's why the reaction occurs the way it does.